thank you for joining all of us here to hear some of our collective thoughts from the business school about how consumers are likely to behave as we emerge from lockdown, possibly looking at a further lockdown, by the way things seem to be going in some countries, and to see how consumers are coming to terms with the events of the past few months, of course, which most of us haven't really experienced anything like this in our lifetime. So, sorry, as the world basically is trying to grapple with the economic and I guess the psychological impact of COVID and the threat of a possible second wave, everyone from governments to the financial industry, stock markets, and of course retailers, and why we're here today, and brand owners will be scrambling to try and understand and predict our behavior as consumers in this so-called new normal. So the key questions really have to be, have our needs actually changed? And if so, how? And what about our mindsets, our thoughts about life, health, and our aspirations and expectations for the future going forward? Now, there's obviously no proverbial crystal ball, but we can make some fairly sensible predictions based on what we understand about how the brain works, in terms of how it responds to this sort of traumatic series of events. So one thing we do know is that when the brain is placed under threat, it seeks safety. It literally scrambles to regain control, and our behavior starts to be dominated by our gut instincts, our flight or fight mode, if you like. And this is referred to as system one thinking. And it tends to dominate our decision-making as the brain struggles to maintain a sense of control over what's essentially a suddenly unfamiliar and clearly threatening environment. Now, our responses to threat are characterized by snap decisions, impulsive responses, comfort seeking, and risk aversion. And this was reflected in the evidence of panic buying that we saw early on in the outbreak. And consumers were buying up essential products like breads, eggs, milk, and so forth, irrespective of brand, as they started to become scarce on the shelves. This reflects the brain in effectively survival mode. Now, system one brain seeks simplicity, shortcuts, and security, both from our current social interactions and, of course, now in the satisfaction of our consumptive needs. But later, as food production increased and the supply chains became rebooted, consumers sought safety by choosing familiar and trusted brands, while the newly emerging ones on the fringe started to become ignored. But that doesn't mean, or that's not to say that there isn't an opportunity for new brands, products, and services. And as we've observed during lockdown, of course, some brands actually flourished when consumers are basically forced to adopt different strategies in terms of what they were eating, how they're working, and of course, socializing, all of which had to be shifted considerably so onto a digital environment, i.e. online. But because the brain is hardwired to reduce certain uncertainty and to minimize cognitive effort, this provides an opportunity for brands who can empathize with the changes in lifestyle that we've all had to make, and to make it easy for us to adopt new routines and rituals that we picked up during the lockdown period. Those brands who can help us in that way and make it easy for us will succeed in building strong and I think mutually beneficial relationships with customers at this point in time. Now, the reason for this is because as we adapt and we start to learn new behaviors or new ways of behaving, during this so-called setting in period, habit and rituals are actually malleable. So brands can now embed themselves into consumers' lives during this period now, during this period of change through consolidation and reinforcement of these new behaviors. Now, in this backdrop of effectively enforced behavior change on us, and as there is a clear threat of a possible second wave and continues to hang overhead, one thing we can be pretty confident about, based on what we know about how the brain works, is that trust is going to become an even more sought after commodity for some years to come. But what signifies comfort or safety for one country doesn't necessarily extend to all. So, for example, we witnessed panic buying of guns, toilet paper, and pasta in the States, dried ham in Spain, and boxed wine in Finland. So brands basically need to understand how to communicate trust and dependability in different markets, and neuromarketing approaches can be of assistance in this respect. And I'm happy to talk more about that during the Q&A session. Now, an additional factor that we have to take into account is the extent to which different countries were actually impacted by the virus, as this map on the right-hand side of the screen demonstrates or illustrates. You can see here the difference between low impacted and high impacted incidence rates. Now, the way that the brain is likely to react in the short to medium term is likely to depend on what it has recently experienced. This is why I'm referring to this as a tale of two brains. It depends on your experience what you see, whether you see the faces or the vase. There's two sides of the same coin. What we've seen is this discrepancy between the way in which different countries have reacted, both in terms of intervening early or not, and the subsequent consequences, predicts a sharp divergence or dichotomy of consumer behavior based on different experiences of this pandemic. So consumers in geographical regions which have or experience a low incidence rate will have suffered relatively mild levels of stress. And a moderate amount of stress can actually be beneficial for the brain. And it has a positive impact such that we can make predictions about, as these countries emerge out of lockdown, they're likely to reevaluate life in a more positive way. And this can manifest itself, we anticipate, in the form of greater productivity, well-being, satisfaction, and increased consumption. In contrast, areas that were badly affected by COVID and who experience, or consumers who experience high levels of stress, are likely to continue to remain cautious and in threat mode. And this in turn predisposes to what's referred to as a scarcity mindset, the feeling of not having enough to satisfy one's basic needs. Now, this set of predictions actually fits very well with the economic data from the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic, where areas that were hit hard did actually poorly economically, as you'd expect, but places that did well and intervened early actually experienced a lift in economic activity. Now, a scarcity mindset predisposes to poorer impulse control, a present-focused bias, so concentrating on the here and now, and interestingly, high-calorie food intake, because a scarcity mindset primes people to focus on decisions that impact immediate survival. High-calorie foods, which are typically high in fat, sugar, and salt, and are, in that respect, evolutionarily adaptive, are therefore likely to see a rise in sales in those areas. Brands can also do well by employing strategies that are time limited and perhaps decrease upfront costs, because those are the kinds of things that will appeal to a scarcity mindset. In contrast, for regions that actually managed to navigate the pandemic relatively effectively, aspirational products and brands that improve growth and well-being are likely to appeal to those groups who've experienced psychological growth. We've all had time to reflect. So in this respect, we can predict that categories in the domain of fitness, self-health and productivity are likely to flourish in those regions less badly impacted. Now, for brands, these insights that we think are emerging on the dichotomy of consumer responses based on how they have experienced the last few months leads to the prescription of a more localized or perhaps hyper-localized understanding of the impact of the pandemic on consumer psyches, whether they have experienced psychological stress or growth. And this may be a key and important factor in predicting which products or strategies are likely to succeed in different markets. Now, neuroscience can also make some predictions about behavior change based on the recent enforcement of social distancing. The past has taught us that reduced frequency of social interactions and prolonged periods of isolation has, as you would anticipate, of course, a rather predictably negative impact on emotional well-being. And this predisposes to symptoms of anxiety and depression, and a reduced capacity to manage stress. Now, for many in the elderly age bracket, especially those who are not digitally acclimatized, the need for social interaction as we emerge from lockdown will be even more important, because social isolation also can lead to cognitive decline, as I said, a lesser capacity to define goals, manage tasks, and so forth. And this was a group that was, of course, experienced an epidemic of isolation even before COVID hit. So what can brands do to help? I think those who are attuned to the changing needs of this demographic and can offer relevant support in that respect in terms of providing socialization, even if it's not directly related to their existing product or services, should benefit from reciprocity and increased brand advocacy. So how can they do that? Well, these are quite straightforward things. For example, providing high quality customer engagement via deployment both in-store and online, of course, for those who can, who are shopping now online, of front-facing customer service staff with effective conversational skills, and that's likely to curry favour with this group. And I think we're also going to see a new emergence of some clever ways in which the elderly can be accommodated online. So in other words, through webinars designed to promote online social interactions, which brands can facilitate. So virtual wine tours, wine tasting, you can distribute sample sachets and things to homes in advance, or educational and informational group-based activities. All of those we think are set to become an emerging trend. Right, well, the immediate needs of the younger consumers perhaps has been of less concern to governments, as social media, video conferencing, even gaming over these massively multiplayer online games, kept them in touch throughout the recently imposed restrictions on social contact. But it's worth bearing in mind that these virtual environments represent a relatively untapped opportunity for brands to market their products to, apologies, an experience-hungry demographic. Many of the kids who are 18, 19, expecting to go to university, take a year off, or get a job, will have been disappointed. So there will be an opportunity here for brands to hold their hands going forward. Apologise for my cough. But it's worth bearing in mind, these virtual environments basically represent a great opportunity, which is still relatively untapped, for brands to market their products to these groups. So Fortnite alone actually has a player base of over 350 million players. In-grain product placement, advertising, or even assistance in game strategy are all things that brands could deploy to connect with this segment. Now, another area that our knowledge of how the brain works can provide some useful insights on is the luxury category. In China, we saw that luxury brands actually benefited in the short term from what's referred to as revenge buying, which resulted in a sales bounce soon after the shops reopened after imposed lockdown. Now, this behavior is consistent with a neural model of reward and punishment that will predict excessive reward seeking after periods of abstinence in order to rebalance the circuits involved in reward and punishment. But it also predicts that this behavior will be short-lived because of the rebalancing, and also particularly in view of net losses in income and job security. Furthermore, because luxury products are high-touch goods, so decisions are typically made at point of purchase, which is laden with high-quality experiences, service, elaborate layout designs in store, and even buying rituals that are typically tied to these brick-and-mortar retail stores. The recently enforced shift to online purchasing is likely to hit luxury brands hard, unless they can recreate or supplant these sensorial experiences or features in the digital space. Now, one opportunity that they could explore is to leverage social exclusivity by creating elite online communities of brand affiliates. Now, a key psychological driver behind the ownership of luxury products is social comparison, and referencing. High profile and select pre-launch online house parties, for example, with fellow luxury brand buyers, might provide this aspirational reference group at least a virtual avenue by which to signal status in the social hierarchy. And as health consciousness has obviously taken on a new significance due to the crisis, the luxury category may also mutate, differing perhaps in form, heralding the rise of premium organic food products, exclusive health retreats, and other elite wellness-related consumption opportunities. The luxury health and wellness segment may well expect, therefore, a boom in consumption and an expanding market as health-related products, services, and activities appreciate in value, particularly as that is something that the brain is seeking, safety and health, at this point in time. Now, the entailing shifts in the consumer landscape, which have been brought on, as we've discussed, by the recent pandemic, presents both uncertainty and, I guess, opportunity for brands. Older age groups are likely to experience an increased need for security and trust. Younger generations who were less badly affected by the virus may have become more complacent, throwing caution to the wind, perhaps, as the recent pandemic has taught them that life can be unpredictable and opportunities should be grabbed when they arise. So as the repercussions of the current pandemic look set to continue, I'm afraid, for the foreseeable future, according to the news anyway, neuroscience and psychological science can at least provide us some guides towards the longer term changes in consumer behavior that we might expect. So a final few thoughts just to sum up. From what we can anticipate based on what we know about the brain, we suggest that brains now consider adopting a hyper-localized approach based on how consumers have been hit across different geographical locations or regions by the virus. Make it easy, it's what the brain needs right now, for consumers to create new routines based on newly learned behaviors, while habits and rituals are malleable. help consumers navigate a rapidly changing digital environment. And lastly, there is a key need to build trust, leverage knowledge of new mindsets, and also become part of consumers' evolving needs as we go forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Gemma, for laying out a very great groundwork, and obviously thanks to everyone who is able to join us today. So, well, basically, first, I'll just kind of ask Zexan to show. I literally have one slide, so you'll see you'll actually hear me talking a lot and not showing you nearly as much stuff. But hopefully, what I'm able to say is sort of useful. So yeah, like feel free. Basically, I've been conducting some research. I've been giving some interviews and so on and so forth. A lot of those things were related to COVID and its implications for consumer behavior, for branding. So by all means, feel free to keep the conversation going. Reach out on LinkedIn or Twitter, and I'd be happy to connect. Now, putting that information aside, so basically in my part, so I'm going to be building on a lot of the points that Gemma has mentioned, and also providing some extensions. But basically what I'm hoping to do here, I'm basically going to focus on the interface between evolving consumer psychology and its implication for brands. Let me preface my section by saying that depending on your sector and your industry, some of these insights may apply to you and your brands or clients more readily, and some others may apply less readily, but I think it's nevertheless important to keep it relatively broad, relatively inclusive and expansive. So the first point that I'm going to start us off with is that from a consumer psychology standpoint, there are at least several notable changes that in consumer behavior and spending that we are observing now that Singapore and other nearby countries are arguably emerging from the pandemic's peak. From the standpoint of an average consumer, we're definitely witnessing depressed spending. We see loss of reduction of income, a dramatic drop in consumers' confidence, as evidenced by, for example, Kantar's and Gallup's global and regional polls. We also seen a lot of increase in mental health, distress, mental well-being issues. So that's definitely something that's happening quite prevalently. And then we're also witnessing reprioritization of needs away from higher level needs to more basic necessities. So many among consumers are definitely experiencing difficulties as a function of either being laid off or furloughed or clocking less hours in the wake of COVID-19. So this has been definitely a big change here. Now, obviously, with all this, against this background, with all of these implications, this naturally had a direct impact on local and regional companies. So, for instance, some notable brands that recently announced either their bankruptcy or insolvency or huge financial trouble are Kidzania Theme Park, that some of you may be aware of, Singtel's online video streaming, Hook, Aldo Shoes Accessories, Sasa. There's also a couple of more, Japan's Renowned Inc., which is a big textile company selling clothes, and a couple of others like supply chain solutions company Li & Fung. So this is real, this is big. And the interesting thing, sort of building off on that, is that one notable consumer spending change in the current climate specifically is that quite a few people, I would say actually many people, even among the wealthy, they have temporarily shifted to become less materialistic, less possessions oriented, and also somewhat less status driven. Notably, high-end luxury and sort of non-necessity brands that have been always traditionally strong in the Asia-Pacific region tend to suffer the most during such situations. So if you think about brands like Cartier, Chopard, Tiffany, Bulgari, and the like, they all slashed their APAC forecasts already several times and really had to cut back on their ambitions. Unsurprisingly, the global high-end sector is bracing for impact, not only because of obviously lack of tourists or store closures that we're now past, at least the store closure part, but then also obviously because of the lower foot traffic among locals. And that's really creating the even more negative environment here. However, having said that, this opens up a couple of clear, compelling possibilities. First of all, for lower end offerings, there's a great possibility to tap into this reprioritization of needs. And this is something I myself personally witnessed in a recent research study of mine that I conducted with young Singaporean adults. That's sort of what's on their minds. So there's clearly this need for basically better offerings that are able to tap into that reprioritization. However, having said that, one thing that I would add to that is that while temporarily foregoing this high-end and discretionary pursuits favors in sort of at the expense of basic necessities is expected during the pandemic. So necessities are definitely coming to the forefront. Now that we have emerged to post-circuit breaker, the CB, into phase 2, and I guess at some point in the near future, hopefully in phase 3, I won't be surprised if there's a resurgence of consumerism, with people rewarding themselves and their loved ones for having underwent this pandemic crisis and coping with the waves of relative uncertainty. So something that Gemma alluded to as well. So what can brands do about it to best prepare themselves? To best prepare themselves, companies and businesses may already want to start crafting their campaign messages and drawing their attention to how basically customers and their loved ones have grown both emotionally and psychologically, and how these customers kind of deserve to be symbolically rewarded as a result. So that can be a central theme behind brands' messaging. And note that this notion, what I'm talking about, is somewhat different from the notion of revenge shopping that is getting quite popular these days, because revenge shopping is quite cool, it's interesting, but it's a separate topic in and of itself. And furthermore, focusing on what I just said, sort of this heal and rebuild angle that I alluded to, some recent research findings by a colleague of mine actually at NTU Business School, they have found that even post-outbreak, people in affected countries and particularly high-density cities like obviously Singapore and other regional cities, people are really likely to remain stressed and frustrated. And one way for businesses and companies to restore a consumer sense of equilibrium is basically by enabling such individuals to exert control in their own lives by buying very practical, very utilitarian products. Another important thing to remember that I also wanted to bring up is that in the current environment, filled with all sorts of stress factors and anxiety that also I sort of brought up earlier today, customers' tolerance for poor experiences isn't becoming any higher. And in fact, it's getting lower, which is why brands should be really, really mindful of that and keep that in mind. As a case in point, the research piece that I mentioned to you that I've conducted recently with a panel of young Singaporean adults suggested that if we look at their mood levels and sentiments that they exhibit, they are really, really historically low. And anything that risks to bring that levels even lower, let's say something like a suboptimal customer experience, that may backfire big time. So something to keep in mind. Another thing that I also wanted to provide some reflection on is that companies and brands and businesses, they may be powerless, and they are in fact powerless to stop crisis from happening, but what they can certainly do is to do more to help people stay positive, stay optimistic and forward-looking. If, let's say, you as a mission-driven company, you treat customers graciously and you treat your clients graciously during the crisis and its aftermath that we're encountering right now, don't be surprised when they stick with you now that normalcy is gradually returning. And once things return to full normalcy and new normal sets in, the new normal that everyone is talking about so much these days, all the brands and businesses would definitely scramble to get back into the game. But people will really remember those who were there for people themselves during the pandemic crisis. And adopting a forward-looking perspective, it would really be important for brands to adopt and to send a resilience type of messaging beyond mere words, wherein brands that walk the talk to actually help rebuild communities, help society bounce back in the aftermath, those would be really the companies and brands to benefit the most. And again, I want to make sure that I provide quite a few examples here and there. So some recent examples of how brands actually did take on quite successfully a very active role in community recovery are companies that you're all familiar with, like Alibaba, JD.com, and Tencent. In the evolving COVID situation, in many ways, they have set quite an example for sort of how to be out there and to help people out. And then they also appear to, like, some examples what they've done, right? And Irene may also sort of talk about some of those examples from China. They appear to have been instrumental in temporarily or permanently taking in thousands of impacted displaced workers, providing funding, community guidance apps and programs like counseling, investing into different remote tech solutions to also accelerate these emergency responses, helping people get back to works, to schools, whether physically or virtually, and also helping to reestablish compromised supply chains. So again, just an example, fairly recent one, how sort of things have worked out there. And taken together, I guess my ultimate takeaway for this part is that whether or not consumers continue staying brand loyal to your specific brand in the current economy, and when the economy sort of recovers, at least partially or eventually fully, it will be pretty much decided in the coming days and weeks. Again, based on the company's reactions to the pandemic crisis and its aftermath. Relatedly, and this is the interesting point that a lot of like clients and friends and industry folks that I talk to, there's this tendency to, care a lot about customers, and when it comes to employees, not so much. And I think that's been a big takeaway from the current crisis. As and when employees return to the workplace, and many already have, and some are sort of still working remotely, but at some point they foresee coming back to the office, it is critical for companies to consider and remember that most of their employees have been away from their workplaces for weeks and even months, experiencing shared anxiety, uncertainty, and sometimes even depression and psychological trauma because of COVID-19. Hence, the optimal tone for companies would be to display that they care, that they're empathetic, and also that at the same time, they're not only here for their customers and shareholders to excel and to move on, but also critically for their employees to move on with their everyday lives and workplace activities, and kind of trying to fast track temporarily overshadowed needs for growth, needs for belongingness beyond basic existing needs. And this is super critical again, because a lot of time there's disconnect, actually a huge disconnect between the way companies treat their employees and the way they treat their customers. And one example could be that all the time in the industry and in academia, we're talking about customer obsession or customer centricity, but we don't nearly place as much emphasis on employee obsession or employee centricity for that matter. Your brand, it's important to remember that your brand really starts internally with your employees, and they are your best brand ambassadors, and especially so in these current tough times. And in terms of my own research that I've conducted on so the topic of transgressions and sort of all the different crises that are happening, especially as applied to brands, my own research suggests that most common grievances employees and consumers have with companies is when they feel that their personal values have been compromised or they have been violated. And one of the most successful recovery strategies that have proven itself are those strategies that enable employees, customers, and other stakeholders to heal and rebuild. And one notable example that I wanted to provide, a fairly recent one. So just this past week came from ride-hailing Grab, again, a super app that we're all very familiar with, who I think handled the very unfortunate consequence or outcome of having to lay off its 5% of workers that you may have heard about, estimated 360 employees or so. And I think that, again, this was very unfortunate, but they did it, and I believe in a very gracious and gentle way. Specifically, just over a week ago, Grab committed to paying for medical insurance coverage until the end of this year for those workers that have been unfortunately laid off, a severance payment of half a month for every 6 months of completed service, enhanced separation payment of 1.5 months, with sort of on top of that any other compensation they may receive, bonus for work done this year, encashment of maternity, paternity leaves, some decent career transition and other support, etc. And as well as some other, as far as I remember correctly, some other waivers in terms of how involved they can be in basically holding shares of Grab. So again, what that means, in addition to like keeping their laptops, whatever. So what that really means again is that even when crisis comes and companies basically have to make decisions that are quite tough to make and very, very sensitive, still that can be done in a very, very reasonable and gracious way. So that's important to keep in mind, especially when it comes to treating your employees. And one of the other notable trends is that brand purpose is emerging more prominent these days. COVID-19 is certainly pressure testing companies' purpose and mission. And I feel that still, even in such an environment, it can be done quite effectively. So one notable example of a recent brand that was able to live up to its purpose against the backdrop of pandemic and how the economy is recovering is Unilever's Lifebuoy soap brand. So what they did, both globally as well as across the region, they donated soap and cash as part of the Unilever's 100 million plus global commitment against the virus. And they even, what I found pretty interesting, they even took a brand agnostic approach, such that they actually named competitor brands of other soap manufacturers in part of their marketing communications. And basically, what they wanted to highlight is to highlight preventive measures. That it's not like you don't necessarily only have to buy Unilever soap, Lifebuoy, but you can just buy soap basically, and just make sure that you follow that personal hygiene practices. And they've done that particularly in again across multiple markets, but one market that I'm familiar with is India here. And interestingly, while it takes years and multiple touch points to build that brand purpose, people are very, very fast at rushing to conclusions when basically something goes wrong, and especially when it comes to such a sensitive environment like now, where any sort of hint at violation of basic security needs and basic safety needs could be interpreted as a big time. Another important point for brands to take away and keep in mind is that brands should absolutely at all costs avoid same generic and cliche pandemic-related messaging we're all too familiar in recent weeks. I've personally been flooded with literally hundreds of similar-looking messages along the lines of, we're here for you, we know what you're going through, we're in this together. Are you, and really, do you? The best strategy here would be to avoid jumping on bandwagon and the urge to just say something for the sake of saying. But at the same time, don't be just tempted to disappear off consumers' radars altogether. Talk substance, talk about the real difference that your brand is making, and kind of walk the talk, so to speak. And one other thing that I'll just mention here, and I'm gonna keep a few other things for Q&A session and some additional things, but from a psychological standpoint too, one known way to improve and repair a sour mood and restore a sense of comfort is to engage in the so-called shopping therapy. So we've kind of been knowing about that finding for a while now, and Gemma related to that in part. However, what's interesting part here is that since traditional retail and shopping avenues are being restricted in terms of the crowds that can be allowed to let in, and many people still, they would prefer rather to stay at home. It's not surprising that consumers have really turned to online shopping during this time of quarantine to kind of comfort and distract themselves. But while the impact of such online shopping spree for non-essential items tend to be pretty short-lived and short-term, it still nevertheless opens an opportunity to provide this short-term kind of remedy for sudden anxiety and stress levels associated with having underwent the pandemic. And hence, brands may want to capitalize on that. So last point, last but not the least, I just wanted to wrap this up by saying that, again, given that the audience that we're able to attract today, we have a lot of marketers, but whether on agency side or manufacturer side or consulting and so on, there's hardly a better time now than now to engage in professional development, to learn new skills via various online marketing courses and webinars. And apart from the regular paid alternatives that some of you may know, I would really suggest to check out a variety of free or drastically reduced short, medium, and long-term courses that have all of a sudden become available because of the pandemic. So some options to consider that I'm aware of personally are expanded Coursera and edX offerings, Ivy League courses via Class Central, Skillshare that, as far as I remember, provides 2 months of free access of premium, including digital marketing, affiliate marketing topics, HubSpot's Academy, various free marketing courses and certifications, Udemy's online marketing courses, Code Academy's coding and website design courses, marketing mini degree by CXL Institute that's focused really on growth marketing. So again, if you have time, feel free to check those out. All of them are free, so there's always room to grow and to improve and learn for all of us. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
So for my part, I'm going to share with you some observation we can see from China. So the reason why I choose China is because we all know China is the first epicenter of this pandemic. So in China, actually, they implement the lockdown policy in the nationwide in the late January, and all the business has been resumed in the early of April. So the nationwide quarantine has lasting for around 2 months. So basically, we can observe some trends that emerge in the Chinese consumers could be a good example for us to understand how consumer patterns might be changed after the pandemic. Okay, first of all. Okay, so first of all, maybe everyone might wonder, can life return to normal after the lockdown has been relaxed? The simple answer is probably not. The main reason is because we can still see very clearly that our consumers still have some concerns about going out. So this is actually a survey conducted by Ipsos. So what they're trying to ask is ask the participants to answer their agreements on a very simple statement. Even if business are allowed to reopen and travel resumes, I'm going to be very nervous about leaving my home. So they do the survey in different countries. Actually, the patterns are pretty similar. So let's focus on what happened in China. So for the Chinese respondent, actually we see the majority of the participants, they still say that they are strongly agree or somewhat agree with this statement, meaning that they still feel quite nervous about leaving their homes. So we keep this in mind, we can see some new change emerge. So the first one, very straightforwardly, you see that if they are worried about going out to consume outside, then it's more likely they will increase the likelihood to eat at home. So we indeed see that their consumers' mindset has been shifted to a homebody mindset, which means that we observe more consumers, they now will shift towards high purchase of the food items to prepare the food at home, while the e-commerce. So according to research conducted by Nielsen, they found that 67% of the Chinese consumer, they say they will purchase the daily necessities and fresh foods more than twice a week during the pandemic. And also 80% of them, they said that the healthy eating now become their new focus. So if we conclude from this finding, we can see that the Chinese consumers are now shift more to the homebody mindset. And for those people who are used to eating in the outside restaurant before, so now for them, the home cooking become a new concept or a new habit. So this is the 3 major online platforms that for the consumer can order the fresh items. You can see all of them has seen some growth. So even for some platforms, the growth can be as high as 200%. And what's more important, we can see from this is that 85% of the participants, they stated that they are going to continue using the online avenue to purchase the fresh food, even after the pandemic passes. So it suggests that actually once the habit has been formed, so it's more likely to be continued. So the second thing is that we see that some of the consumers, they might be quite new to cooking. They might not be cook a lot at home before. So that's why they are going to rely a lot on those cooking apps or the recipe apps. So this is an interview from very typical young consumers in China. So what she said is very representative. She mentioned that she used to eat at the workplace or eat at the outside restaurant before. But after the pandemic, she tries to lower down the infection possibility. So that's why she has no choice but need to learn how to cook. So that's why he would turn to some online platform like the lifestyle app, Little Red Book, to seek for those other users might share some tips on how to cook or some recipes. So we also see some apps which dedicated to the recipe sharing function. So for example, like this one is called 下厨房. So if it translates to English, it means that cook at the kitchen. So as you can see, just after the lockdown, so the daily active users of this app actually surged a lot by 27%. And if you look at the page of this app, you can see this is a very user-friendly, because for the users, you can easily see some videos to teach you how to cook. And what's more convenient for the users, you can directly order the food items listed in the menu to the shopping cart. And as you can see, there are also provided two versions of the menus, of the recipes. So one version is the complete version, and the other one is we call it as a simplified version, which means that even though you are a complete novice, it's also very easy for you to follow the steps. So the second thing is that for many restaurants, because now the customer cannot go out to enjoy their food at the restaurant, so therefore they also consider to provide some ready-to-cook products or the meal kits to their consumers. So for example, like the Haidilao, they provide the self-heating hot pot so that the consumer, if they order this product, they can easily enjoy the hot pot at their home. So you can see that for other dining restaurants, they will also provide the cooking meals, the meal kits for their consumers to order. So lastly, as you can see, if you are a consumer, you still cannot find any time to cook at your home. So this is also a solution for you. This is an example from Hong Kong. So recently we see that there is a new business mode, which means that this is the delivery service of the home cooking meals. What's different from this one with the traditional delivery service is this kind of meals or bentos are not prepared by professional chefs or any restaurants. They are prepared by a group of housewives. So this housewife, the website will gather a group of housewives. They have passion for cooking. So each day they will have a different group of available house chefs. And 2 days before the day, they are going to announce the menu so that you can make the order easily. So moving on, let's look at another new trend that we can see very clearly. That would be the digitalization. So we have to say that China has already become a digital leader in terms of the consumer face sales in the e-commerce platforms. After the pandemic actually become an accelerator for those areas traditionally are less digitalized. So first of all, let's look at a hot trend emerged this year. That is the rise of the live streamings. In China, actually most of the live streaming sections are very product driven, which means they focus a lot on sales. So this can be captured by the term live streaming to sales. The live streaming is actually started from 2019, last year. But this year, because of the COVID-19, we do see a huge growth in terms of the live streaming business. So let's look at this number. So Taobao itself has observed over 700% growth in live streaming business in February alone, just after the lockdown. And also we say that today, the China's retail economy has become more influencer driven, which means that the online buyers will follow the idols' recommendations. They will trust their idols, the live streamers, to make the purchase decision. And also we see that the player in the live streaming area is not just the e-commerce platforms. So like in this example, we do see the JD.com, this is the e-commerce platform, has partnered with some live streaming and short video platform like Kuaishou. So under the partnership, so now the consumers of Kuaishou can directly order the products in Kuaishou. So there's no need for them to be redirected to JD.com. And then the JD.com will provide a delivery service and also after-sales service to the consumers. This is how the collaboration works. And also we see there is a great diversity of the live streamers. So first of all, we do see some professional KOLs, key opinion leaders. Those are professional live streamers. They have a huge group of online fans. And this is at the top 2 live streamers in China. One is Wei Ya, the other is Li Jiaqi. And also from this year, we do see many celebrities. Now they also join the live streaming business and also open their live streaming sessions. So this is one example from actress Liu Tao. She is a famous mainland China actress. So she ran her first live streaming show on in the middle of this year, and it do have a very good sales performance. Lastly, we also see some of the CEO of the manufacturer, some business executives of the manufacturer, like this one, she's the CEO of China's biggest air conditioner maker, Li. She also do the live streaming session at the Kuaishou platform. So it also has sold very well through the live streaming session. And we see that the live streaming now has become a key to attract the consumers. If you look at what had happened in the mid-year shopping festival, June the 18th festival, this month. So you can see that for the JD.com itself, it has hosting more than 300,000 live stream sessions during this shopping festival. In Taobao, there is also more than 300 celebrities, 600 brand executives, and also 10,000 physical retail stores are joining the live streaming sessions to engage with the consumers. And also this year is quite special that we do observe there are more luxury brands are participating in the live streaming or the shopping festivals as well. So part of the reason, I think for the luxury brand, many of them are quite reluctant to join the e-commerce platform because they believe this might hurt their brand image. But this year is quite different because they also have the pressure to remove their inventory. So that's why they also are quite passionate about joining this kind of shopping festival. And the sales performance, as you can see during the 20 days shopping festival, is quite positive because the total sales number has reached a record high to reach the RMB almost close to 700 billion. So moving on, let's look at some of the areas traditionally considered as less digitalized. So first of all, we do observe that nowadays, because people are not encouraged to go out, so that's why they have to do some exercise at home. So this photo actually showing some typical residents in China. They are doing some home workout at home, follow some video tutorial. So some of the brands actually embrace this trend. For example, like Nike, their first quarter digital sales in China actually increased by 30%. The main reason is because the company has launched some home workout program via its mobile app. And also we do see other apps which are dedicated to the fitness function. For example, this is the most downloaded app, fitness app in China. It's called Keep. So through the Keep, you can easily view the videos to do the workout. You can buy some fitness equipment. You can also share your exercise routine with others. So this Keep app actually has some social networking functions. So let's look at this is the interview from an elderly consumer, which I believe is also very representative. So this interviewee is actually 63 years old and a retiree in Shanghai. So I think what he's mentioned is very interesting. He said that previously he's actually quite stubborn, not quite acceptable to those using the online things. But nowadays, because they cannot go out, so it forced him to do the exercise at home, follow the instructions on Keep. And now they actually find the gadgets a lot of fun. So it's very likely to see that this kind of elderly consumers, after the pandemic, they can also learn how to use online things to facilitate their lives. So this is another example that is a fitness video games. So this example is actually from Nintendo. So they develop, they have a product called Ring Fit Adventure. So during the quarantine time, we do see that this product actually was sold very well in mainland China. This kind of product can combine both the fun elements and also to help the consumers to fulfill the fitness goal. Okay, moving on, let's look at another areas. That's in the house markets. So we say that traditionally for the agency in the house market, they have all the consumers, they have used to the face-to-face interactions. So the agent will guide the potential consumers to do the home tour. So that's the way we buy the houses. But after the pandemics, because the consumers nowadays are not able to go out to see the house by themselves, so they rely more on the virtual property showing sections. So this is a survey conducted by McKinsey. So what they try to compare is the total number of the VR property showing sections conducted in the Beike.com. Beike.com is actually a property platform in China. So you can see there is a huge difference. Just after 1 month, you see the total number of the VR session has increased 35 times. And also for the agency company, they might feel that this can lift their service efficiency as well. So this is an interview conducted with the operation director in Beike. So what he says is that previously, each of the salesperson can only serve 30 customers per day. However, now with the help of the VR viewing platform, they can double the capacity. And now each salesperson can serve 70 customers per day. And also in terms of the sales performance is quite impressive as well. So in this example he mentioned, in just about 8 minutes, they have already sold 2/3 of the homes. So this data suggests that nowadays, maybe the Chinese consumers are seriously accepting the idea of buying homes online. So lastly, we can see that in the medical areas, we can also use the digitalization to facilitate our life. So this is so-called the free online medical consultations, which means that the patient can directly consult the doctor while the app. So they don't need to go to the hospital. So this is a WeDoctor is actually an app developed by Tencent. So what they found is that in 3 months after the quarantine period, so you can see that the registered doctors number on their free consultation platform has increased 36 times in this platform. And also we see another survey, the results revealed that 34% of the participants said that they had tried the online medical consultation section for the first time after the outbreak of COVID-19. And also encouraged by the government, we do see more public hospitals in China now can provide the drug delivery service to their patients. Okay, moving on, the last trend I'm going to share with all of you will be, we see that the consumers tend to spend their money wisely. So this is maybe quite easy to understand because many of the consumers, their income has been influenced during the pandemic time. So that's why they need to plan how to spend the money more cautiously. So the first pattern we observe is many of them are doing the consumption downgrade. So this is one example. This is a typical consumer. She tries to share her, record her consumption downgrade since COVID-19. So some key message we can see from her list is that for example, previously she tries to use some organic detergent, but now she tries to choose other cheaper alternatives, some local brand detergents. And previously she tries to use the facial cleanser and from an imported brand, Dove. But now she decides to downgrade to use some local brand facial cleanser instead. And also in another survey, we also found that 21% of the participants said that they plan to reduce their expenses in luxury consumption after the pandemic. And in view of this kind of trend, consumers have the tendency to downgrade their consumption. We do see that there are some of the brands are also launch some more affordable sub-brands. So for example, like the Haidilao hotpot restaurant, this is considered a relatively high-end hotpot restaurant. But this year, they also launched some sub-brands, 4 sub-brands. And these sub-brands are selling some, selling some fast food. So this is some menus that you can see from some of these brands. So actually they sell the noodle, all the featured products in this new restaurants are the noodles. And as you can see, the noodles are sold in a relatively low price, around 7 to 12 RMB. This is actually around 30% cheaper than the industry average. Having been said that some of the consumers might decrease their spending in certain areas, we do see that there is some other areas consumers might consider to increase their spending. So one of the area is some health-related areas. So because of the pandemic, so most of the consumers now focus more on their healthy domain. So in this survey conducted by Kaidu Consulting Company, they found that 83% of their participants said they will continue to stock the mask and antiseptic liquid at home even after the pandemic passes. And 63 of them said they are willing to purchase small appliances for healthy improvement purpose. So some examples may be air purifiers or disinfectors. This is the product they are willing to invest to increase their health. And lastly, as you can see, 38% of the participants also plan to increase their investment on medical insurance to protect themselves and also their family members. And another area is safety areas. So this might be good news for the vehicle manufacturers, the car manufacturers. This is a survey conducted by Ipsos. So what they're trying to understand is how the COVID-19 impact on people's purchase intention on the personal vehicles. So in China, we see that the results are quite encouraging because we see 63% of the participants say that do indicate that they would like to increase their, they would like to purchase the vehicle. Their purchase in a vehicle intention has increased after COVID-19. So the main reasons why they would like to buy the personal vehicle is because they feel safer or more protected from the virus if they can ride on their personal vehicle rather than taking any other mode of public transportation. And we also see from the same survey that the Chinese consumers now become more interested in the health-related vehicle features. So if the car can provide some functions like the AC system with germ filtering function, or the car seats are made by antibacterial material. So this is the features that can be very appealing to the consumers in this situation. Okay, to recap what I have shared in this part, we do observe 3 major trends after the pandemic. So first one, we see more people spend time at home. They would like to prepare their food at home, and they will also focus more on the healthiness. Secondly, we do see the digitalization, especially the live streaming business, has grown a lot after the pandemic. And we also see the digitalization has been penetrated to some areas traditionally are less digitalized. And lastly, although we see some consumers might choose to downgrade their consumption in the areas they can easily find the alternatives, we also see that the consumers are willing to spend more in the areas they believe can improve their healthiness and also safety. So that's all for my sharing. So thank you all.
Mr. Ho asked, after COVID-19 pandemic, will you think that physical retail business model will be changed, and what will happen to our oversupply of retail malls in Singapore or worldwide? Does it mean that consumer behavior will be changed permanently or only an interim action? So we also see some other participants also ask, so is this consumer behavior change is like Angela also asked, likely to be enduring or permanent change in the future? So I'll open to the floor. Any of the speakers do you want to address these questions? Will it be permanent or maybe just in the interim? So maybe, yeah, Gemma, you want to?
Yeah, I would suggest that, yes, many of these changes will be permanent to some extent, and it will also depend on how brands adapt to help consumers, settle in these new behaviors. So I think you're going to see an increase in in-home entertainment, in-home gaming, particularly if brands start to exploit those opportunities to advertise within the virtual environments. Of course, and if they start providing inducements and rewards to those people, to do with linking consumption of, say, FMCG products during the gaming experience, and you can get that, kind of promos or vouchers in that game, then you see you're consolidating the new behavior of, socializing online, playing online, consuming online. And I think we've seen a kind of like fast track of human evolution over the, kind of being forced over the last few months. So yeah, I would say so.
Okay, so maybe Manso, you want to try to add on any?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll weigh in. So it's, like the long-term implications are always hard to predict, but I'll add a couple of points, right? So first of all, omnichannel has sort of been on the rise for a while now, right? So it's all about kind of supplementing the offline with online, and we know from research that they work in a synergistic manner. So you kind of, as consumers move across the channels, that's helpful. So this is going to stay for sure. Now, a lot of the, like, if you think about anchor big retailers in shopping malls, right? They've kind of been on decline for a while now. So both locally in Singapore, right? Like a lot of them are struggling. If we talk about, like, let's say more North America, like JCPenney, Macy's, etc. Now all of a sudden they realize that, hey, maybe after all, we don't need that many physical stores, right? But here the cautionary note though is that, like, some experts these days, they're sort of saying, oh, it's kind of the end of physical retail, or it's death of physical retail. That's too premature, because again, at the end of the day, some of these effects are temporary. So there's going to be some resurgence, but absolutely, most likely than not to the previous levels. So there's going to be some important changes, and especially as it relates to omnichannel and kind of the switch toward the hybrid model.
Thank you, Manso. So, Irene, do you have any, comments on whether this change will be permanent, or, based on the case study you'll be seeing, the trend you'll be seeing, over in the overseas country, or maybe in Singapore, permanent, or maybe just this next few months, or maybe 1 year?
Because we still have a high uncertainty in terms of how long this pandemic might last, my feeling is that once the habits has been formed, it's going to last for a while. It cannot be forever, but for a while, at least.
Okay, Ken. So I think right now the uncertainty is too high. So maybe just for all of us to prepare for the worst, also prepare for the better future. I think it should be then nothing is certain, nothing is definite. So just keep open-minded. Okay, so now let's move on to the next question. Also, because just now three of the speakers today also mentioned on the spending pattern, the luxury brand, the pricing, like people willing to spend more on the higher quality of the home products, or the luxury brand tactics has been changed. Because some of the participants asked, like, one asking how will retailers overcome this challenging time? Like, not forget, online purchasing is only for effective if products are homogeneous or standardized in nature, like not luxury products. Like I won't, even this time, I don't even want to buy, I mean, I won't feel like buying a very expensive TV if I don't see it, or aircon or something like that, or other like jewelry or other car or what. Then also we have Spotify as is the decline of luxury spending means higher price item will be much lesser being brought by customer, or another participant also asked, F&B concepts are struggling even in phase 2 opening, while Hai Di Lao, Michelin star restaurant are fully booked through July. So we are seeing a mix. So some of the luxury brand or middle luxury or middle high brand, some are doing well, some are not doing well. And some of the, because some adapt to the online presence, or some, because sometimes you know that very more expensive thing, we are not tend to buy online some comfortably. So what is your thoughts? Like also open to I mean, 3 of you to the floor. I mean, regarding this luxury brand, middle, like, because you know, price tactics got a different layer. It's a triangle. So the most expensive one, the luxury brand, the middle one, then and also the base, the necessarily need one. So maybe we start from Professor Gemma. You any comments on this?
Yeah, well, I'm going to answer this from a multi-sensory perspective and leave Mansoor and Irene maybe to comment on the price issue side. The reality is, and I think I mentioned this in my talk, you know, things which are like luxurious, as you've said yourself, you don't want to go out and just buy it online, because there's a ritual associated with parting with such you know, a large amount of money. In many cases, you really need the tactile component, which currently is kind of poor in the virtual environment. We can see the introduction of olfactometers coming online soon. So you'll be able to smell your whiskies and so forth before you buy them online. But for the tactile component, that's well, I don't know, maybe that too will be fast tracked, because if these luxury brands wanted to survive on an online environment, maybe it will, you know, kickstart the tech companies to start to provide gloves which you can put into your plug into your laptop, and when you put your hand in, it provides tactile information about the product that you're going to buy, the high-end, perhaps jewelry, or the quality of the leather of a bag, and so forth. So that's something that we could look forward to.
Thank you, Gemma. So how about Mansoor? Any because just like you mentioned a lot on the luxury brand and pricing issues. So yeah.
So well. So just reiterating, right, like in part what I already said, but also expanded that. So luxury brands definitely are the one that you would think by definition should be suffering, and quite a lot of them did. However, there's also quite a few notable examples that brands that kept their share or even increased their share, right? So it's possible, it's doable. However, the strategies need to evolve. So one example is, especially if we talk about Singapore F&B scene, right? A lot of brands that traditionally they will be like, we would never do delivery, we would never team up with Foodpanda or Grab, or we would never right? Like it has to be dine-in experience, etc. They started delivering. They started to either do it through their partners or themselves. And again, some people would argue that maybe experience is not the same, or maybe when your food arrives, it's going to be, I mean, like, I don't know, like not so like hot or anything, or ready for consumption. But again, right, like this is the trend for, in some, especially we're talking about luxury brands, it's almost like the term that I like here is brand democratization. So it's, again, it doesn't necessarily have to mean that now all those luxury high-end brands have to slash prices or engage in aggressive promotions. Actually, not at all, because again, if we're going back to the example of China, right? So a lot of people were very offended with Dior, because in the wake of pandemic, many luxury brands were considering, oh, should we now decrease prices or at least like make some promotions? And they were the ones that said, no, you know what, we're going to increase prices because the supply chain issues, material sourcing, etc. So now it's actually now, I think now is an interesting time for a lot of those luxury retailers, be they F&B or clothing or accessories and whatnot, to rethink, to evolve those strategies. But ultimately, again, on the consumer well-being side, I mean, I'm sure we would all be very happy if those brands rethink their pricing strategy, and especially, you know, in the, you know, lowering them. But again, on the brand side, right, they don't want you don't want to do brand equity dilution. So you have to be very strategic, very careful, and you don't want to be just engaged in promotion war or price war or anything. So that's something to keep in mind too.
Thank you, Manso. So Irene, just now you mentioned of the because okay, before I mean this is the luxury the spending is the question. So just now Manso mentioned the luxury brand in China. So we also see that after they ease off all the restriction, we see a lot of people in China buying luxury brand. We saw a news report, Gucci, Prada, Chanel, all are being queued out long in Chengdu and everywhere. And just like in your site, you also mentioned people tend to buy higher quality of maybe home products. So, I mean, based on your perspective, what is your view on this kind of luxury buying and even, or spending behavior?
I mean, for the really rich people, their income might not be influenced a lot. But if you see the majority of the population, many of them, their income will be influenced by the pandemic. So that's why you will see that if you are talking about those small proportion of the top consumers, their behaviors might not be influenced. They might feel this is a good opportunity to invest more on the luxury brand before they increase the price. However, if you take a whole look on the general population, we still see the consumption trend will be decreasing rather than increase. That's my view.
Thank you, Ryan. So I think the spending there is just that how we try to lure them to try to spend with our company and our business is the one very interesting questions. Okay, so now let's move on to the next one. We are seeing a lot. Now I got more questions, so we might be overrun a little bit. So hope that you guys can bear with us. We try to answer as much as we can, but if cannot, we hope that you guys understand. Okay, so it's very interesting. So we see, okay, there's this Daniel asks, okay, maybe this particular to Gemma, Professor Gemma. So from the perspective of neuroscience, what is your take on news numbness, fatigue, and attention of the news cycle, and how will that impact consumer behavior? For example, I stopped checking the daily, I stopped looking detailed of the number of cases in Singapore, I think maybe months ago. I just see, okay, how many numbers, I don't see even read the detail. I think all of us feel the same. There's a fatigueness of the fatigue of the news numbness, and how does it impact the consumer behavior? Like, I know I need to wash my hand. I know I need to wear my mask. I need to keep a distance. So how does it, neuroscience perspective, how does it affect?
Okay, well, I can ask, you can help me to answer this question by answering this one. So why did you do it? Why did you stop?
I want to stay healthy. And also it's kind of tiring and emotionally not very healthy and not very good.
Exactly. It's emotionally stressful, right? And yes. So, yeah, we typically avoid confrontation. We avoid stress if we can, and over a prolonged period of time, constantly reading bad news, starts to affect your mood. You'll start to feel a bit down, depressed. When is this ever going to end? We're all feeling the same, and then there's going to be a second wave. All those plans that you had for your vacation, spend quality time with, friends and so forth, it's all going out of the window, and seeing cases rise or, listening to the same thing, bad news again, doesn't really make us feel good. So we try to, how we compensate for this is, to shift into more of an escapism mode. And so in fact, we've seen in the UK something like 59% of people said they joined new social comms platforms and online games, and and then nearly 80% of them then said, this is during that period, have said, well, we're just going to continue to do that even after this, because the future is so uncertain as to when this is going to end, and we just become avoidant.
Yeah, so try to avoid those negative news.
Yes, we habituate, tell us something new, tell us something positive, but yeah. It seems like there's only bad news on the news these days, so that's why we do it. That's why
it's very interesting that the brain's trying to find the positive things and to be excited. So also this also lead to the next question. This attendee asked, does it mean that gaming and entertainment industry will have a brighter future due to brain looking for more excitement? So just actually you also try to, you also answered through typing. There's a person asked, he eat more junk food, he play more games during this. So maybe you can further elaborate. How does it mean for business? Like in the future, is it business? Let's say I'm a businessman, I want to ship my company or my sales or my products means more brain exciting way, or how does it mean to the business?
Absolutely. And I think, as I said, we've been sort of like pushed to respond faster than we would have. Things, as Mansour alluded, were moving in this direction in any case, to doing everything online, becoming digitized and so forth. That doesn't mean that there isn't room for, bricks and mortar retail, or experiences outside. In fact, the younger generations, as we've seen, right, with the immediately after lockdown, Holland Village, bars were spilling out into the road, no one wearing masks. And then that is the brain grappling with trying to recover control, going back to the normal, right? And so that you'll see this divergence of two sets of consumers, one whose brain is, for them, going back to the normal is how it was before, and others, normal, these habits they've adopted whilst during lockdown have become normal for them. So yes, there is no doubt from my mind that virtual environment games and platforms are going to be coming more online, becoming more easily accessible price-wise. I mean, and now is exactly the right time for that industry to move fast. And as such, brands will inevitably, and I know they're already doing so, being offered opportunities to build relationships with their consumers in the virtual environment. So I think this is a great time for the in-home entertainment market, and I reckon you'll see these VR immersive platforms start to become really the norm.
Understand.
So I'll just kind of add to that. So I mean, streaming, gaming, esports, right? We're all talking, those are buzzing topics and on the rise, right? And unsurprisingly so. So if you think about on the gaming, right, there's obviously like Twitch and Fortnite. So recently they had huge concerts, right? Like in the virtual environment with like millions of people tuning in, right? Another thing, even Facebook gaming, right? So Facebook just kind of got actively into that. The only thing that's also interesting is that I would say that the rule of the first mover advantage and kind of pioneers still applies, right? So for example, if you think about streaming, traditionally it was basically Netflix and nothing else, right? But these days, everyone jumped on the bandwagon. So HBO Max, Disney Plus, we're talking about Quibi and a bunch of other platforms. So as it becomes more saturated, more competitive, the word is out, it's going to be harder and harder to compete. So in that sense, agility matters, and sort of trying to kind of not really follow the trend, but try to anticipate and predict those trends. And back to the, since Gemma was talking about like this news consumption and stuff like that, right? So again, this really, a lot of people are turned off by news, and they sort of try to reduce that exposure, right? So they're trying to basically distance themselves and try to distract themselves. And if we look at the trends, so recently, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Economist, FT, they all released their figures for paid subscribers, and it's really cool to see that they grew like crazy when the pandemic started, and then now they've either plateaued or sort of some of them already see some declines, right? So that's definitely reflected there. So people are just tired of catching up with that news, so they just want some distraction, they just want to get away. Escapism is the good word that Gemma brought up. Yeah.
Okay, so Mansour, also following up with the just on your answer, Mansour. So because people also ask, since that now news fatigue, that people tend to have a more positive news message from the public, from the marketing, from the advertisement channel. So also participants ask, how will marketing channel branding tactics change in the future? And how do I, like just like you mentioned in your shaping a new routine for their customer? Does it mean the previous advertisement method or promotion way won't work for the consumer anymore? Because you mentioned people are looking for more positive message, more not those like negative kind of things. So does it affect, the new normal, what is a way of advertisement and marketing and branding tactics?
Yeah, well, that's a, I'll just provide my 2 cents here. That's a pretty broad question, right? So the first and foremost, right, I think whatever was taken for granted, right? Like, let's say if a brand had a previously quite high loyalty, again, some loyalty would still remain, but all I'm saying is that it shouldn't be like as a default taken for granted that whatever worked before is going to continue working now. So the good thing, important thing first is to, again, try to understand the customers and sort of what they're going through, and thanks to that, tailor your messages, right? This doesn't necessarily mean that, let's say, as a brand, now you only need to utilize, let's say in your advertisement, you only need to utilize like positive emotional appeals or something like that. Not necessarily. So that's just one idea here. But another thing too is that as consumers are emerging from this new normal, again, the role of getting those insights and understanding what they kind of want to hear is really big. But for brands, again, like that's what happened. Like when the pandemic just started, we saw all those COVID related messaging and then like fear appeals and trying to get into that. Now this part is becoming, again, as it became more saturated, those messages do not make that much of a difference anymore. So we definitely see, Zexam, to what you alluded to, much more sort of positivity in the messaging and sort of, again, talking about the growth mindset, rebuilding, healing. So some of those messages are gonna be working quite effectively in the next little while. But again, as once the competition is there, once like every brand adopt uniform messaging, that's where strategy needs to change and evolve all the time. So just some preliminary thoughts here.
I think maybe based on what Mansoor said just now, so change is a constant. So definitely for advertisement and marketing tactics in the future, you need to take in consideration like what Gemma shared just now on the brain and also what the need and also what Mansoor said, the message that you are delivering must be in line and in terms of related to the current climate and context. Thank you so much. So Irene, so also following up for just now the question to Professor Gemma just now on the brain excitement, like people tend to spend and how they change, and also because participants also ask, will stay home economy continue to be hot in the future, and how will the emerging gig economy affect the post-COVID-19 consumer buying behavior? I'll ask this question to you because just how you're sharing on the China context, we realize that in China perspective, in China situation, like stay-home economy is always a big thing, but after COVID-19, right now during the COVID-19 become more bigger and more hotter. Right. And also the emerging gig economy, like those freelancer, those gig job, employee, employer, and workers. How does it affect the consumer buying behavior? Like the stay-home economy, stay-home business, stay-home market. Like, what is your view in terms of what can we learn from China?
I think what we can learn from China is two things. First of all, they do realize that spending time with their family become more important. So that's why I saw some comments that doesn't mean that they're willing to buy some higher quality home living products, such cookware, toilets. I believe so, because they spend more time at home and they also want to pursue for high quality life. So this is one thing. And the other thing, as I mentioned before, they also want to eat healthier because this is the pandemic. It hurts your healthiness. So it's very salient or very straightforward that people want to eat healthier. So previously in China, you see most of the big cities, actually people emphasize a lot on efficiency. So they will order the takeaway food. So for the young people, most of them, they start to, I think they get used to the lifestyle. They just eat the takeaway food. However, now they might reevaluate their lifestyle and realize that actually eating healthier might be more important than before.
Okay.
So this is, I think, can be applied to Singaporean as well.
Yeah, so I think although the context of Singapore and China is very different, like the population, the trend, but because China, they has been releasing, they are resuming the business and economy earlier than most of us, so we can take some of the example from there.
Yeah, in early April, yes.
Yeah, so we can try to learn from them also, try to read some of the trend and what's going on right now. So, okay, so this question, I think maybe a short one to all three of you. There's a two-side of prediction, more spending or more saving. Which will be more likely the way in the future? So maybe Irene, you want to elaborate, like right now, China, we see two reports also, two sides of story. One saying more saving because people want to save because Chinese people tend to have the habit to save. Yeah. So maybe from you first. So give us some thought, some idea or maybe some insight on more saving or more spending in the future.
As I shared just now, they will try to save more in the area that they believe they won't hurt their life quality much. So if for the area they can easily find alternative, they will do the downgrade. However, for the another areas, they will spend more. So this area they believe are much more important in their life, they weight more in this area, like safety and healthiness. So these two, they probably will spend more.
Thank you, understand. So Professor Gemma, as I'm also a normal person, so I have that thing that I want to spend something to indulge myself after the circuit breaker, I mean, go for a travel. But at the meanwhile, I also want to save for some, I mean, for rainy days in the future. So I don't know how this works on the brain and also the neuroscience. So maybe from your expertise, you can try to shed some light. How does it affect, what business need to know and be aware of this kind of conflict in the future?
Well, I think I just would re-echo what Irene has just said. It really depends on what we're spending on. Now, I'm kind of going to answer this together with this one here. Do you foresee restaurants trying to bring the dining experience to homes, and how will they do so? And that prompts me to say, well, they have to think creatively, because one of the things that the brain has not really been experiencing much is fun. I mean, we're really, all of us, lacking fun, right? And so, okay, if we can't go out, I think celebrity chefs and those at high-end restaurants need to think creatively about not just supplying their food via Grab, but actually having events. So bringing experiences into the home. Perhaps you've got 20 families where the food is delivered at the same time. The chef is online. He's going to talk you through perhaps wine and food pairings. And you might even see, the extension of what we've seen online house parties, brands and restaurants kicking into that kind of format. So you have, massive online consumption of new products, which are brought to you by Grab from specific restaurants. And that's fun, because you're taking care of the lack of fun that we've had, plus the need for socialization. And if that's with groups of people you haven't met before, but you have something in common because the same food has just arrived at your doorstep, it's fine dining maybe, or it's fun dining. That's how I think people will start sort of thinking about spending their money, things which make life fun again.
Thank you. So thank you, Gemma, to elaborate on that. So Mansoor, yes, your turn. So I have this.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with both Gemma and Irene, right? So saving versus spending, it's not necessarily a dichotomy. It's not either or, right? So a lot of these things will be domain specific, but as a person who conducts research on personal finance and kind of psychology of saving, spending behavior, I should say that it's also we know from psychology of consumers, one thing that on average, quite a few of us tend to be, in terms of specifically saving, quite short-sighted and sort of, do not have necessarily a long-term perspective. So again, we wouldn't be surprised if this change that's happening is sort of in favor of saving is temporary in some ways, and a lot of people are going to be resuming back to their sort of typical spending habits in quite a in a reasonably short period of time. And if for one indication, again, this is by no means perfect parallel, but if we look at the Spanish flu, so recently some researchers released some data in terms of after Spanish flu, and again, obviously the scale and timeline is so different, but what they found is that after the pandemic, in a fairly reasonable, short, limited amount of time, a lot of things went to normal, especially the way people spent and sort of the quantities and everything. So again, some things would for sure go back to where they were, or at least close. So.
Thank you, Mansoor. So also following up for what you shared just now. So does it mean that since the conflict, the spending saving is still going on in the future? So maybe a quick advice to the business out there. How should they position themselves in the new future, in the new normal? What is maybe a short summary or short advice to them to repositioning on repositioning?
Zaxon, when you mean repositioning, do you mean brands? What kind of messaging should they adopt? What kind of image should they?
Yes, it's like how they're going to convey, and because now business finally realize diversification and change is a content. It's not just a say thing. It's not just a motto that everyone just talk but don't act. They want to act, but they have a question: how and what is a concern I need to know when I reposition?
Yeah, well, so I think again, there's a lot of different possibilities, and some may work for some brands depending on industry and sector, etc. But one possible piece of advice that I can offer is that whatever area or whatever niche you're specializing in, try to own it, position yourself as a thought leader in that area, and try to engage in thought leadership, be it on communicating to your partners or customers, posting on social media, basically trying to own your niche and try to become an authoritative thought expert. And that a lot of that part again builds on what Gemma and Irene were talking about, trust and trustworthiness, the importance of trust these days. Yeah.
It's good to know that, trust coming back to all of us to be more important. So I think due to time constraint, we still have quite a number of questions, but unfortunately we are unable to attend and try to answer it. So maybe a last quick summary, maybe starting from Professor Gemma. So maybe from a neuroscience perspective, brain functioning perspective, what your maybe a short summary and very quick advice to the business men and women attending today? What is your maybe suggestion for them to continue to grab the business opportunity in the new normal and the new future?
Right. Well, I'll just leave with this thought as I started, so I'll finish. There isn't a crystal ball here. And this is not the time to sit back and watch, because Mansoor pointed out that first mover advantage is important. And this is a time when market research and consumer insight is extremely important. You need to understand how consumers are behaving in the digital environment, how have their needs changed, and what is the impact of COVID on different regions. And all of that will guide you to developing strategies which align exactly with their current needs and their current concerns. And those, I think, brands who can really empathize with consumers in any particular market, and recognize that they can be there to hold their hands through this, will do very well.
Thank you, Gemma. So, Dr. Mansoor, any final suggestion or, quick one, a summary to all the businessmen and women today on maybe from your perspective, your expertise, what is your advice to them for them to grab the business opportunity is this new future and new normal?
Yeah, so I'll add, so I think a lot of our conversation that we said and sort of pieces of advice were quite targeted toward large businesses and corporations. I also want to highlight the small and medium business perspective side. So for those kinds of businesses, I think one good possibility could be to play up the underdog brand narrative, wherein you basically engage in storytelling about the business, a lack of resources, humble origins, and maybe determined struggle against odds, which is particularly relevant in the current environment. And from years of research, we know underdog branding is very important because consumers tend to positively react to that. And that's where also talking about, emphasizing community and communal relationship norms, and also doing some local search engine optimization, that could be, that could make a big difference.
Thank you, Mansoor. So last but not least, Irene, Dr. Irene. So any things we can learn from China, or any last final advice? Because we all here, we know that China is one of our biggest market, biggest investment and foreign investment throughout the whole countries and globally. So what is your final advice from them? What can we learn from them? Or maybe for the businessmen and women today, how can they grab the business opportunity in this new normal and new future?
I feel this moment actually is difficult for both consumers and also businessmen. So it's very crucial for the businessmen to control the cost. So just now we mentioned something like a live streaming or do the digitalization thing. It can help the businessman to increase the service efficiency, and in the meanwhile, it can help you reduce the cost because you shorten the process from the manufacturer to the consumer, so that you can provide a more better price, bigger discount, which is very appealing to the consumers who also want to save their money at this moment. So that's, I think, is the final message I would like to provide.